I feel that is what our passage from Luke is all about. It is all about glory being ever present. Peter, James, and John have been following Jesus for 3 years. They've seen him perform countless healings. They've heard him preach and listened to him teach. But they keep missing the point. They keep failing to understand the nature of his mission and the profound meaning of his words. Now, it was Jesus' practice to go off every once in a while to meditate and to pray. It was an opportunity for him to recharge and reconnect with God. Usually, he went by himself. He was a great believer in the value of solitude and silence. But occasionally, he'd bring along a few of his closest friends. After an especially long and exhausting stretch of healing and teaching, Jesus needs a break. So he invites Peter and James and John to go on retreat, if you will. Tradition is that they climbed up the mountain known as Mount Tabor. I've been there. It's quite a climb. Probably by the time they get to the top, those apostles are just plain worn out. The text says they are weighed down with sleep. Have you tried to pray and meditate when you've been really wiped out? It's hard. It's very hard. When I teach meditation, people often say to me, you know, the first 3 or 4 or 5 minutes are fine, but then I find myself falling to sleep. And I usually tell them, well, don't worry about it. That's God telling you you need more sleep. It's hard not to simply doze off. And that's apparently what happens here. But while they are in this slumbery state, all sorts of stuff is happening. For Jesus is suddenly surrounded by light. He fairly glows. And then there are 2 men standing beside him, Moses and Elijah, the great lawgiver and the premier prophet. And the 3 of them begin to talk. The apostles come fully awake with all the commotion. As Eugene Peterson translates, when they came to, rubbing their eyes, they saw Jesus in his glory. Thinking that this is a one-time event, they suggest building booths, putting up some sort of structure to mark the occasion. This is the place where it happened, where Jesus shone in glory. Let's put up a brass plaque somewhere. But in doing so, they once again completely missed the point. It's not that Jesus is suddenly covered in glory. Rather, it is a pointed reminder that glory is all around us, every day, everywhere. And we just need to wake up and see it. For it is right in front of us all the time. Even in those people and places where we least expect it. Like a ragtag unit of black soldiers, many thought only good for peeling potatoes and scrubbing pots. Or in a carpenter's son from a lowly, no-account place like Nazareth. Or a young woman born into a well-to-do family back in the early part of the 19th century. Her mother died when she was only 6, and so she and her siblings were raised by their aunt. She received a decent education for a woman back in those days, no Eden Seminary education, but a decent education. Indeed, she became fluent in 7 languages. But when she married, her husband largely restricted her to the kitchen and the nursery. Still, her literary talent and her burning desire to help those who were oppressed burned within her. In time, her husband allowed her to help edit the abolitionist newspaper that he published. And she even managed to publish a book of poetry in 1854 behind his back, though. In 1861, when the Civil War broke out, she longed to help the Union cause. But being a woman, the most she was expected to do was to make underwear and knit socks, which would be sent to the Union soldiers, and maybe pack up some care packages of comforting touches from home. Not that she thought these things were unimportant or trivial, but she felt she could do more if she were only allowed to use her skills more fully. Late that year, she visited Washington, D.C. with her father and some others, and one afternoon they rode out of the city, accompanied by Reverend James Clark, to observe a review of the troops, a formal, disciplined march to show their skills. But no sooner than the review had begun than the involved soldiers were called away to go to the aid of a group of Union soldiers who had been ambushed. On their way back to the city, they were accompanied by a phalanx of soldiers who were marching back to their camp in Washington. As they rode along, she and others in the coach began to sing songs, including one about the abolitionist John Brown. It had a stirring tune and spoke of the deceased abolitionist's body a moldering in the grave. Pastor Clark turned to her. "Why do you not write some good words to that stirring tune?" "I wish I might," she responded. Her daughter writes, "Very early the next morning, when the east was still gray, my mother awoke and found to her amazement that lines of poetry seemed to be shaping themselves in her mind. She lay still, and the words went on. By and by, the whole poem was complete in her mind. She rose at once, found a sheet of paper and the stump of an old yellow pencil, and began to write down the lines. Her completed poem was sent to the Atlantic Monthly and printed in February of the next year. Soon it was being sung by many to the tune of John Brown's body. It was even being sung by soldiers in their camps. Its first stanza is still emblazoned on the hearts and memories of many. "Mine eyes have seen the glory," Julia Ward Howe had written, "of the coming of the Lord. He is trampling out the vintage where the grapes of wrath are stored. He hath loosed his fateful lightning with his terrible swift sword. His truth is marching on." Reflecting on her visit to the troops in the outskirts of the city, Howe wrote that the glory of the Lord could be seen in the watchfires of 100 circling camps. But it is in the final stanza that she spoke most clearly about Howe's understanding of the war and its purpose, Howe's understanding that this war was being fought to end slavery. In the beauty of the lilies, Christ was born across the sea with a glory in his bosom that transfigures you and me. As he died to make us holy, let us die to make all free. God's truth is marching on. For how the war was seen as a necessary evil, the only way that slavery would finally be brought to an end. She abhorred war itself, make no mistake. In fact, after 1865, she spent the rest of her days working for international peace, even proposing that Mother's Day should be about more than flowers and memories. It should be a time when mothers themselves focused on peace efforts. For how there was nothing glorious about war itself. Rather, the glory was found in the fact that soldiers, black and white, were willing to give up their very lives if necessary, to bring to an end the peculiar institution, as slavery was called. That was where the glory was to be found, in that willingness to give oneself. How understood that glory can be found in the most unexpected places, in the most unexpected people. The question on this Transfiguration Sunday, indeed on every day of the year, is simply this: will you be awake to see it? Will you be open to the glory that is all around?